I was very thrilled when we were in London. There's a scene with John Gielgud and Noah where they go into the archives of the library and they look at, I think they look at a bust or a death mask of Liszt or something like that. And there's also a plaster cast of Chopin's hands.
Magnificent fingers. So virile.
They're mine. And the other great one was, which I loved, the scene where Gielgud is teaching Noah to play the piano and they're breaking strings and he's going, marvelous, brilliant, you know, Franz Liszt broke plenty, you know what I mean? And when we got back to Adelaide, Sir John had finished all his stuff, but Scott wanted a shot under the piano of David Helfgott in his funny, whatever, odd shoes. I think he had odd shoes and odd socks on. And he wanted John Gielgud's feet to be hitting the regular rhythm. They were my feet. I was in John Gielgud's shoes for just half an hour. I did receive a very influential letter from a friend of Scott's, from I don't even think he's a psychoanalyst. I think he was like a Jungian disciple or great reader. And he wrote to me talking about how Jung wrote, you know, in a kind of anti-Freudian way, was writing about human archetypes. And he said, you know, the human archetypes are something like there's the hermit, or there's the imp, or there's the trickster, or there's the hero, or there's the animus, the spirit of a character. And this was the Jungian analysis of what all contributed to the self. That appealed to me enormously because I could see the imp in David, and I could see the hero, and I could see the spirit. That connected in a way that, having played some of those Shakespearean characters, the fools, the idiots, the ratbags, or whatever, the licensed people, because I thought there was a lot of holy fool, which I think was another one of the Jungian archetypes. David sort of danced around between all of these different dimensions. So having played the fool in Lear and having played outsiders gave me a reference point that was in my own arsenal of how to approach a character.
I did. I thought it was a cat. Well, kind of. I identified with cats, but I kind of did that.
What became the sort of prologue for the film is from the work I'd done with all the typed out transcripts of David's interviews. There was just this gorgeous little, I thought, definitive monologue that was the essence of him. And Scott sort of shot it in an abstract setting. We were just in a studio with a kind of neutral, nothing deep focused background. And he said, I'm just going to have your head come into frame. And it was the monologue about pussycats. And I liked it because it didn't declare, I don't know, pretentious literary themes or anything like that. It was just what was bubbling around inside this very interesting man's mind.
They miss you when you try to strike them, is that right? So maybe I was a sad cat. Was I a sad cat? Because I wonder, yeah, I wonder about cats.
I think on that first scene, there were maybe 2 or 3 takes, and that was just to do with improving the rhythm of the camera, because it was a very slow kind of... The camera gave me the entrance. I was just sitting still, and then they just sort of came in on it. Throughout the whole film, it's very flattering when people thought a lot of it was semi-improvised. But I'd had that conversation with Scott because of the precision of David's thought patterns that I'd got from writing those transcripts out. So the pussycat monologue at the beginning of the film, I said to Scott, I have to learn this role like I'm approaching a season in the theatre. And if it's an 8-week season, when we shoot any particular scene, I want it to be like a Thursday night in the middle of the run where you know you have to go out and keep it alive and fresh, but it's deeply embedded. So I work very meticulously to, ingrain those speech patterns, because what Jan had written or what I'd got from David's transcripts were far more interesting and more intricate than what I could come up with on the spur of the moment. Then it might have turned into a bit of waffle. I think it's probably the longest period I've ever spent on one project in terms of reading it, waiting for it to happen, shooting it, promoting it. I lived with it for literally 5 years. And I remember at the end of '97, after the Oscars, and then, doors had opened for me that I never dreamed of leaping through as a career trajectory. And I was shooting Elizabeth in London, and I got an invitation from the producers, or Andrew Kay, because David was on a roll and touring the world, and even up to this day I'm very aware that he's doing concerts globally in places that he never dreamed of going. But they gave him the chance to play the Rack 3 at the Albert Hall. And I went along to that. It was an amazing night because he came out, he looked about 8. I'm sure he was nervous, or maybe it's just him. And I'd never seen him in that scale of concert before. He came out and he sat down, and it was like being at a Stedford for an 8-year-old. And he looked up at the conductor and he nodded. And then he went into the whole Rack 3. And at the end of the piece, he finished, and the crowd went ballistic. Do you know what I mean? It was like a rock concert. They were screaming at the stage. Complete standing ovation. I knew that that was the night that I had to close that chapter of 5 years. I had 2 Elizabethan films lined up, and I thought, oh, well, the bubble will burst any minute now. But I was busy, but it just felt like the right... it just celebrated something in a very, very special way, that this man whose life I'd been allowed to enter into and portray in the fiction of a dramatic film, 2 hours, to have him at the Royal Albert Hall playing the Rack 3 was like the great, icing on the cake.